Yo, what is up guys, my name is Patrick, host of EDH Brutality, and you're watching another EDH deck tech. So without further ado, have a sit back, relax, and let's get into it. Welcome back folks, welcome back to the channel. Thank you for dropping by and your ongoing support. My name is Patrick, host of the EDH Brutality YouTube page, in which we upload Magic the Gathering content and analysis every Sunday. We've got quite the deck tech coming your way. Before we get right into that, a quick and special thanks to patrons like you for making videos like this possible. Now, I know it's been quite some time since our last deck tech video, so we're going to make it up all to you today with this amazing brew ahead. Speaking of which, if you would like to brew with a specific commander but not sure where to start, you can head on over to our Patreon page linked down in the description below, as all members ranked Paladin and higher are provided with a complete deck list with primer for a commander of their choice. Each list will undergo extensive play testing as well as fit around any specified budgets. And to top things off, if you get lucky, it may even be featured on the channel here. With that out of the way, we can finally jump right into today's deck list and commander. So today we've got Gwendlyn Di Corci coming in at 1 red, 2 black, and 1 blue mana. This 3/5 summon legend reads: tap Gwendlyn Di Corci and target player discards 1 card from his or her hand at random. This power may only be used during your turn. As is, discard is already quite the formidable strategy. However, once you add a random discard into the mix, you can really do some damage.
That's a lot of damage!
However, before we discuss how to deal such damage, we must first discuss, is this a deck for you? First of all, you may like this deck if you enjoy being the arch enemy. You want to play a unique commander. You like targeting a single opponent. And lastly, if you enjoy disruption. With that said though, you will dislike this deck if you have a budget, if you're not one for discard themes. Or perhaps you may even dislike this deck if you believe everyone at your pod deserves a fair and equal game.
Well, fuck that guy.
And with that over, we can finally talk about the premise within today's deck, or in other words, the primary goal. Obviously, that is to discard our opponent's hands and gain advantage through it. However, the shortcomings through most discard decks happens when our opponents are out of cards. After all, how are we able to make them discard if they don't have any cards in hand? So what we did with today's deck list is we added several different packages. Obviously, we have tons of discard synergies, but we also added elements from Group Hug, forcing our players to draw up more cards as well as wheel effect cards to ensure that their hands are always full for us to capitalize on. So obviously, this is not going to be your typical discard brew, but once again, that's probably why you're here, to see an unconventional way to win the game. So obviously, Gwendlyn Di Corci, we need a way to abuse her, because it's rather simple. We can't capitalize on our opponents discarding cards if we don't have a way to force them to discard cards. So our first form of abuse happens to be an enchantment called Freed from the Real. Coming in at 2 colors and 1 blue mana, this enchant creature reads: pay 1 blue mana at instant speed to tap enchanted creature, or pay 1 blue mana at instant speed to untap enchanted creature. Which, if we pay 1 blue mana into, will allow us to tap our Gwendlyn Di Corci and then untap her to do it again, forcing a single target opponent to discard 2 cards at random. We can double down with this repeatable effect with a Penman's Aura, coming in at 1 colors and 2 blue mana. This enchant creature reads: pay 1 blue mana instant speed to untap enchanted creature. Pay 1 blue mana for enchanted creature to gain flying until end of turn, or pay 1 blue mana for enchanted creature can't be the target of spells or abilities this turn. And last but not least, pay 1 colorless mana for enchanted creature to get +1/-1 or -1/+1 until end of turn. This card provides great utility as it leaves us with options to not only protect our Gwendlyn Di Corci, but also abuse her tap ability once more. Another great include for abuse happens to be 1000-Year Elixir, coming in at 3 colorless mana. This artifact spell reads, you may activate abilities of creatures you control as though those creatures had haste. Pay 1 colorless mana to untap target creature, enabling us to abuse our commander's ability the moment we send her out. However, none tops this abusive card known as Illusionist Bracers, coming in at 2 colorless mana. This artifact equipment reads, whenever an ability of equipped creature is activated, if it isn't a mana ability, copy that ability. You may choose new targets for the copy, which if paired with the previous cards mentioned isn't too hard to force our opponents to discard their entire hand with the help of a few mana.
I don't even have cards in my hand.
Yeah, boy.
Now, with all this discarding in mind, we must have a way to capitalize on it. Starting off, we have Abyssal Nocturnus, coming in at 1 colorless and 2 black mana. This 2/2 creature horror reads, whenever an opponent discards a card, Abyssal Nocturnus gets +2/+2 and gains fear until end of turn. As well as the Haunt of Hightower, coming in at 4 colors and 2 black mana. This 3/3 legendary creature vampire with flying in lifelink states. Whenever the Haunt of Hightower attacks, defending player discards a card. Whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, put a +1/+1 counter on the Haunt of Hightower. Both being fantastic beaters that can potentially one-shot specific opponents given the amount we are able to discard within this brew. For non-combat themed discard synergies to capitalize on, we have Lazav Dimir Mastermind, coming in at 2 blue and 2 black mana. This 3/3 legendary creature shapeshifter with hexproof reads, whenever a creature is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, you may have Lazav Dimir Mastermind become a copy of that card, except its name is still Lazav Dimir Mastermind. It's legendary in addition to its other types, and it gains hexproof and this ability, which is a really unique and interesting card because sometimes those creature heavy decks might have a banger that we would like to copy, and if they so happen to discard it, well, guess what? We create a copy of it on our side of the battlefield. Another great pairing, this time for utility, happens to be Waste Not, coming in at 1 colors and 1 black mana. This enchantment spell states, whenever an opponent discards a creature card, put a 2/2 black zombie creature token onto the battlefield. Whenever an opponent discards a land card, add 2 black mana to your mana pool, and whenever an opponent discards a non-creature, non-land card, draw a card, which for 2 mana is an absolute powerhouse of an ability. Not to mention, thanks to our commander, our opponents won't have a say in what they discard, as everything will be at random. So prepare for a massive advantage and a lot of angry eyes coming your way. And speaking of anger, we have the creme de la creme of all discard includes, that being Tergrid, God of Frights, coming in at 3 colors and 2 black mana. This 4/5 legendary creature god with menace reads, whenever an opponent sacrifices a non-token permanent or discards a permanent card, you may put that card from a graveyard onto the battlefield under your control. Overall, a pretty nasty card and just too good to not include. Be wary while playing this, as many will refuse to play with you in the future, but if that's the case, this card is double-sided and you can always flip it over for an effect that still matches the theme of the overall deck. Now, while we are on the topic of discard, there are ways to drain our opponents out as well whenever we activate our commander's ability. Starting with Bloodchief Ascension, coming in at 1 black mana. This enchantment spell reads, at the beginning of each end step, if an opponent lost 2 or more life this turn, you may put a quest counter on Bloodchief Ascension. Whenever a card is put into an opponent's graveyard from anywhere, if Bloodchief Ascension has 3 or more quest counters on it, you may have that player lose 2 life. If you do, you gain 2 life. A great include, as typically when you force players to discard cards, you become number 1 on their shit list. So it's always nice to gain life off the process because you will need it to stay alive in the game. Up next, we have Fell Spectre, coming in at 3 colors and 1 black mana. This 1/3 flying creature Spectre reads, when Fell Spectre enters the battlefield, target opponent discards a card. Whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. As well as Liliana's Caress. For 1 colors and 2 black mana, this enchantment spell reads, whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. And oh boy, we are tripling down here with a Megrim at 2 colors and 1 black mana, another enchantment spell that states, whenever any opponent discards a card, Megrim deals 2 damage to him or her. As well as Raiders of the Wake, once again at 3 colors and 1 black mana, an enchantment spell that states, whenever an opponent discards a card, that player loses 2 life. Raid, at the beginning of your end step, if you attack with a creature this turn, target opponent discards a card. So there are plenty of ways, as you can see, to drain out our opponents whenever we use our commander to force our opponent to discard cards. However, if we don't have our commander on board, or perhaps there are no cards to discard, we can still drain out our opponents through other ways. This time through drawing cards. First, we have Keterok Parasite, coming at 1 black mana. This 1/1 creature horror reads, whenever an opponent draws a card, if you control a red permanent, you may have Keterok Parasite deal 1 damage to that player. Or for a classic ability, we have Underworld Dreams. At 3 black mana, this enchantment spell reads, Underworld Dreams does 1 damage to an opponent for each card he or she draws. Up next, we have Shieldred the Apocalypse. At 2 colors and 2 black mana, a 4/5 Death Touch legendary creature Phyrexian Praetor that reads, whenever you draw a card, you gain 2 life, as well as whenever an opponent draws a card, they lose 2 life. And if that wasn't enough, the deck is also equipped with a Words of War for 2 colors and 1 red mana. This enchantment spell reads, pay 1 color's mana, and the next time you would draw a card this turn, Words of War deals 2 damage to target creature or player instead, which happens to be more utility based, especially if you have a mill player or someone is trying to force you to draw out the game. You could just pay the mana cost instead to force damage on your opponents and to prevent that draw. And last but not least, we have Phyrexian Tyranny, coming in at 1 blue, black, and red. This enchantment spell reads, whenever a player draws a card, that player loses 2 life unless he or she pays 2 colorless mana. And I highly doubt that anyone at the table will be regularly paying this cost, because if they spend all their mana on the cards in their hand, well, that doesn't leave them much or anything at all to cast their spells, which we can then later discard thanks to our commander, Gwendlyn Di Corci.
How much is it?
50 cents.
50 cents.
Now, I did mention in the very beginning of the video that each discard deck typically runs out of gas when our opponents run out of cards. As you can see, there are plenty of ways to capitalize off of our forced discard on our opponents, whether it's through our own gain or even their drain. And this is where most players go wrong, is their idea is to simply get rid of all the cards in their opponent's hand and then somehow win from there. But with that, we lose all of our advantage, so we need some way to refill their hands. That's right, this section we're talking about opponent's card draw in a specific group hug styled package. Starting off, we have Anvil of Bogarden, coming in at 2 colorless mana. This artifact spell reads, each player skips his or her discard phase. During each player's draw phase, that player draws an additional card and then chooses and discards a card. And let's face it, with our commander Gwendlyn Di Corci on board, I doubt our opponents will ever be needing to discard down to hand size, so eliminating the discard step entirely does not hurt us. This allows our opponents to draw an additional card and forces a discard as well. Up next, we have Dictate of Grufix, coming in at 1 colors and 2 blue mana. This enchantment spell reads, flash. At the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card, as well as Howling Mine. Once again, at 2 colors mana, an artifact spell that states, each player draws 1 extra card during his or her draw phase. Or how about the same effect with Kami of the Crescent Moon, coming in at 2 blue mana. This 1/3 legendary creature spear states, at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. Or even Temple Bell, coming in at 3 colors mana, an artifact spell that allows us to tap a Temple Bell for each player to draw a card. So as you can see, it's very easy to keep our opponent's hands full so we can capitalize off those discard synergies. However, if we want to get a bit mean with this, we have 2 more draw spells, this time that ping our opponents. Starting with Nekisur, the Mind Razor, coming in at 2 colors, 1 blue, black, and red. This 2/4 legendary creature zombie wizard states, at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. Whenever an opponent draws a card, Nekisar the Mind Razor deals 1 damage to that player. Or for a similar effect, we also do have Spiteful Visions, coming in at 2 colors in 2 red or 2 black mana. This enchantment spell reads, at the beginning of each player's draw step, that player draws an additional card. Whenever a player draws a card, Spiteful Visions deals 1 damage to that player. So not only are we forcing our opponents to draw cards, we will later also force them to discard at random, but it keeps the game flowing, all while they lose life in the process. Which leads to quicker games aren't quite a headache for our opponents even while playing a salty deck. Now, to ensure these game pieces even hit the table, we have to make sure we draw cards ourselves. And how do we do just that? Well, starting off, we have Consecrated Sphinx, coming in at 4 colors in 2 blue mana. This 4/6 flying creature Sphinx reads, whenever an opponent draws a card, you may draw 2 cards. As well as Rhystic Study, coming in at 2 colors in 1 blue mana. This enchantment spell says, whenever an opponent plays a spell, you may draw a card unless that player pays 1 colorless mana. Or how about Siphon Mind at 3 colors in 1 black mana? This sorcery speed spell states, each other player discards a card from his or her hand, and you draw a card for each card discarded this way. And if we're looking for efficient cards that specifically capitalize on our commander's discard ability that we are all building around, we can include cards such as Dream Salvage. For 1 blue or black mana is an instant speed spell that reads, draw cards equal to the number of cards target opponent discarded this turn. Or perhaps we want to play Guess Grimoire. At 4 colors mana, this artifact spell states, whenever an opponent discards a card from his or her hand, you may draw a card. Or last but not least, my personal favorite within the card draw section, Plagiarize. Coming in at 3 colors and 1 blue mana, this instant speed spell reads, until end of turn, if target player would draw a card, instead, that player skips that draw and you draw a card, which works beautifully with any wheel-based effects. For example, let's say we cast a wheel and our opponent has 7 cards. Typically, they will discard those 7 cards and the whole table will draw 7 cards. Well, thanks to Plagiarize, they discard those cards, we capitalize off those discard triggers, and they won't draw a single card. No, we'll draw every card instead, so instead of us drawing 7, they draw 0, and we draw 14.
I really don't know what he said at the end of that sentence.
And if we happen to be lucky enough to have Guess Grimoire on board as well, then just forget it, because you're drawing a card for every single card wheeled out, thanks to our package. Now, obviously, wheeling is a bit interesting within the deck, as not only does it provide our opponents with card draw, which will typically drain their life, but it also forces them to discard whatever cards are in their hand, which allows our synergies to further pop off, as well as filter our own hands and get better cards deeper within our deck. Starting things off for this wheel package, we have Barbed Shocker coming in at 3 colors in 1 red mana. This 2/2 creature insect with trample and haste states, whenever Barbed Shocker deals damage to a player, that player discards all the cards in his or her hand and then draws that many cards. And for a similar effect, we have Dragon Mage at 5 colors in 3 red mana, a 5/5 flying creature dragon wizard that reads, whenever Dragon Mage deals combat damage to a player, each player discards his or her hand and draws 7 cards. Both very strong and repeatable effects. But while we're on the topic of creatures that allow our opponents and us to wheel, we have Jace's Archivist, coming in at 1 colors and 2 blue mana. This 2/2 creature Vidalcan Wizard reads, pay 1 blue mana and tap Jace's Archivist for each player to discard his or her hand, then draws cards equal to the greatest number of cards a player discarded this way, making a repeatable windfall. Or perhaps we want to hit them with a Magus of the Wheel, coming in at 2 colors and 1 red mana, a 3/3 creature human wizard that states, pay 1 colors and 1 red mana and tap and sacrifice Magus of the Wheel. Each player discards their hand, then draws 7 cards, all of which allows us to capitalize on whenever players discard, as well as draw cards thanks to our various packages. And for further redundancy when it comes to creature-based wheels, we do have Cephalid Broker, coming in at 3 colors and 1 blue mana. This 2/2 creature Cephalid reads, tap for target player to draw 2 cards, then discards 2 cards from his or her hand. Or perhaps a weaker yet identical effect with Cephalid Looter, coming in at 2 colors and 1 blue mana. This 2/1 creature Cephalid states, tap Cephalid Looter and target player draws a card, then discards a card from his or her hand. And what I really enjoy about these is we can use them on ourselves to purposely filter the cards in our hand if we don't really have anything useful. And last but not least, the last wheeling creature happens to be Shocker. For 1 colors and 1 red mana, this 1/1 summon insect reads, if Shocker damages any player, that player discards his or her hand, then draws a new hand of that many cards as he or she had before, which typically won't go through given the fact he is only a mere 1/1 without haste, but it's a great include given the cheapness of the spell. For more traditional wheel within this deck, we are equipped with a Windfall, coming in at 2 colors and 1 blue mana. The sorcery spell reads, each player discards his or her hand and draws cards equal to the greatest number a player discarded this way, as well as a Wheel of Fortune, once again coming in at 3 mana at sorcery speed, this time stating, each player must discard their hands and draw 7 cards. For a similar effect, this time in mono black, we have Dark Deal, coming in at 2 colors and 1 black mana. This sorcery speed spell states, each player discards all the cards in his or her hand, then draws that many cards -1, as well as Reforged Soul, coming in at 3 colors and 2 red mana. This sorcery speed spell says, each player discards his or her hand and draws 7 cards with a miracle cost of 1 color in 1 red mana. Now yes, there are a lot of wheel cards, both that we went over and yet to come, but we really want to make sure that this deck has the benefits of players drawing cards and getting those discard triggers off. We want to drain them and we want to capitalize off their discards. After all, when they wheel, they are also discarding cards. So for further redundancy, we do have a Burning Inquiry, a 1 red mana sorcery speed spell that states, each player draws 3 cards, then discards 3 cards at random. Next up happens to be Urza's Guilt, coming in at 2 colors, 1 blue and black mana, stating, each player draws 2 cards, then discards 3 cards from his or her hand, then loses 4 life. Or how about an oldie but a goodie with Memory Jar, a 5 colors artifact spell with eroded text that reads, tap and sacrifice Memory Jar. Each player exiles all cards from their hand face down and draws 7 cards. At the beginning of the next end step, each player discards their hand and returns to their hand each card they exiled this way. Or perhaps we want an unconventional way of wheeling our opponents to get those triggers on the stack. We also do have the Planeswalker, Dak Faden, coming in at 1 colors, blue and red mana. He has a +1 uptick ability that states, target player draws 2 cards, then discards 2 cards. Once again, providing great utility to target a single opponent or perhaps even ourselves. And last but not least, the final card within this package happens to be Wheel and Deal, fitting for the Wheel theme package. Coming at 3 colors and 1 blue mana, this instant speed spell says, any number of target opponents each discards his or her hand and draws 7 cards. you may draw a card, which is a really neat card and honestly a breath of fresh air as we can choose who discards their hand.
Hey, that's pretty good.
And with all this card draw in discards, it's very easy to create a commanding lead, but even so, we must have some sort of insurance in the event that the cards that we are wheeling or drawing in excess don't end up biting us in the ass. So for that reason, I equipped the deck with a Yawgmoth's Will, coming in at 2 colors in 1 black mana. This sorcery speed spell states, until end of turn, you may play cards in your graveyard as though they were in your hand. Cards put into your graveyard this turn are removed from the game instead, as well as an alternate win condition in the event that we do end up drawing out our own deck before we're able to drain all of our opponents through their various amounts of card draw, as well as discarding with a Laboratory Maniac, coming in at 2 colors in 1 blue mana. This 2/2 creature human wizard states, if you would draw a card while your library has no cards in it, you win the game instead. Overall, for protection, the deck is equipped with several counter spells, and if you're interested in seeing those, you can see them down in the full deck list provided in the description below. For our protection to stay alive, we simply have a Propaganda as well as a Swiftfoot boost to equip onto our commander to ensure she stays on the board. And fear not, if you want to play a specific way in the deck, we do have several tutors allowing us to get key pieces, starting with Demonic Tutor, Grim Tutor, as well as Vampiric Tutor. All are very straightforward, and if you'd like to see the specific effect of each card, feel free to go back and pause the video. As we wrap things up, the ramp for the deck is rather simplistic. We have an Arcane Signet, a Chromatic Lantern, a Commander Seer, a Gilded Lotus, and the aforementioned Soul Ring, all ensuring that we have the mana to cast the various spells at our disposal. And finally, last but not least, I did include several utility lands within this deck that further the game plan, whether it's discarding as well as wheels. But the most important one that I will showcase as the last card within today's video happens to be Creeping Tar Pits. It has an instant speed ability if you pay 1 color's blue and black mana into it that states Creeping Tar Pit becomes a 3/2 blue and black elemental creature until end of turn and can't be blocked this turn. It's still a land. And thanks to our various discard and card draw and wheel synergies, it's very easy to whittle our opponent's life totals down, making this a fantastic utility land wherein most often than not becomes a dark horse. And with that, we'll conclude today's episode. I hope you all enjoyed my take on Gwendlyn Di Corci and how we overcame the issues that most discard decks face once our opponents run out of hand. If you have a specific commander that you would like to see brewed, you can head on over to our Patreon page linked down in the description below. And as always, if you want to stay tuned for future videos here on the channel, make sure you like, subscribe, and hit the bell down in the bottom right hand corner of your screen. So being said, my name is Patrick, host of EDH Brutality. I thank you for watching, hope you enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next video. Peace out, guys.